Today, we're diving into one of the wildest corporate stories you've probably never heard. This isn't just a business story. It's an epic saga about a single, unbelievable machine, a clash of entire philosophies, and how a seemingly invincible giant was brought to its knees. So, what is this machine at the center of our story? Well, it's called a photolithography machine, and it is, without a doubt, the most insane piece of technology humans have ever built. We're talking up to $400 million for one machine. It's the size of a double-decker bus, and it has to be shipped in 3 separate Boeing 747s. And its only job? To print. It uses light to etch impossibly tiny patterns onto silicone wafers, a process so fundamental that without it, well, the entire digital world we live in just vanishes. For decades, the undisputed king of this universe was a name we all know, Nikon. They were the masters, the gatekeepers of Moore's Law. So that brings us to the central mystery here. How on earth did a small, no-name Dutch company, ASML, which literally started in a leaky shed next to a Philips office, how did they not only challenge this giant, but completely and utterly dethrone it? To figure that out, we've got to go back in time. Let's set the scene in the 1990s and really understand just how powerful our Goliath, Nikon, truly was. We need to step inside the fortress of what was known as Japan, Inc. By the mid-90s, the market looked like this. It was game over. Nikon, along with their Japanese rival Canon, controlled a jaw-dropping 3/4 of the entire global market for these machines. They weren't just the leaders, they basically were the market. They seemed absolutely untouchable. And how did they get so powerful? Well, a huge part of it was this unique Japanese business structure called a keiretsu. The easiest way to think about it is like a massive, tight-knit family of corporations. Nikon was part of the giant Mitsubishi Group, which meant they had this built-in, fiercely loyal customer base of Japanese chip makers. Everything was done in-house, perfected for customers they already had. It wasn't just a company, it was a fortress. But while Nikon was busy polishing the cannons on its fortress, our underdog, ASML, was doing something completely different. They were about to make one of the most audacious gambles in business history, and it was all based on a totally new way of thinking. And this right here, this is the heart of the whole story. You had two completely opposing philosophies. On one side, Nikon, the fortress. They did everything themselves, obsessed with in-house perfection. They were an island. On the other side, ASML, the network. They knew they couldn't do it all, so from day one, they built a global web of partners, relying on collaboration to survive. This was the real battle. We saw this clash play out in the first big tech battle. Nikon had mastered what's called a stepper, which is kind of like an old-school slide projector. Flash, move, flash. ASML bet the farm on a new idea, step and scan, which worked more like a modern office scanner, smoothly exposing the chip. It was just a better way to do things, making bigger, more consistent chips. But Nikon was making tons of money on their steppers, so they were slow to change. ASML, they had nothing to lose, so they went all in on the future. And that brings us to the main event, the single most important moment in this entire war. One decision, one technological leap that would change everything. I'm talking about the battle over immersion lithography. By the early 2000s, the entire industry was hitting a brick wall. They couldn't make the light any smaller. But then, a brilliant engineer at chipmaker TSMC named Bern J. Lin came up with a genius and kind of crazy idea. He asked, what if you put a single drop of ultra-pure water between the lens and the silicon wafer? You see, light bends differently in water, which basically tricks the lens into being way more powerful. It was an elegant, almost absurdly simple solution. So, presented with this radical idea, the two companies did what their philosophies dictated. Nikon, the king, got nervous. Water and a hyper-clean machine? They worried about bubbles, contamination, all sorts of risks. So they played it safe, trying to squeeze a little more life out of the old dry technology. But ASML, true to their nature, they partnered up directly with TSMC, their customer, and they gambled the entire company on making wet immersion a reality. The market's verdict was swift, and it was absolutely brutal. Nikon's caution turned out to be a fatal mistake. Dry technology hit its limit, just as predicted. Immersion was the future, and everyone knew it. Chipmakers abandoned Nikon and flocked to ASML. Just look at these numbers. By 2011, ASML had grabbed 82% of this critical market. Nikon's share had collapsed. The war was, for all intents and purposes, over. But the story doesn't end there. To keep Moore's Law alive, ASML had to do one more thing. They had to build a machine that was so difficult, so expensive, that it was basically a technological moonshot. A challenge so immense that Nikon and Canon just gave up before they even really started. This was the challenge of EUV. And you can see why they gave up. I mean, building an EUV machine is a legitimate physics nightmare. First off, the light itself, extreme ultraviolet, gets absorbed by everything, including air, so the whole machine has to be a perfect vacuum. You also can't use glass lenses, so you have to use a series of mirrors that are the most perfect, smoothest surfaces ever created by humanity. And the light source? Get this. You have to fire a massive laser at a tiny drop of molten tin 50,000 times a second just to create a single spark of light. It's insane. The R&D costs were astronomical, running into the billions. Even ASML was about to go broke. So they did something no one had ever done before. They went to their biggest customers, Intel, Samsung, and TSMC, and basically said, hey, if you want this machine to exist, you need to help us build it. And those customers, whose entire future depended on this tech, invested over 5 billion euros directly into ASML. Now just stop and think about how wild that is. The people who needed to buy the machine became part owners and co-funders of the company building the machine. It was the ultimate expression of ASML's network philosophy. It was a move that Nikon, trapped inside its fortress, could never, ever have imagined, let alone pulled off. So, with ASML's victory absolutely complete, we have to ask the big question: what really happened here? What were the deep-down reasons that this seemingly unbreakable fortress finally fell? Well, a big part of it was timing and culture. This all went down during Japan's lost decades, a long period of economic stagnation. It created this deeply conservative, risk-averse corporate culture. In that environment, betting the whole company on a crazy moonshot like EUV was just unthinkable. Their caution wasn't a one-time thing. It was a symptom of something much bigger. And then you have to look at Nikon's other business. While this life-or-death lithography war was raging, their DSLR camera division was an absolute cash cow, just printing money. It's easy to imagine how those easy, reliable profits made the company complacent. Why take huge risks in one division when another one is doing so well? It likely starved the lithography unit of the massive investment it needed to compete. But ultimately, you have to come back to their core philosophy, that fortress model, that insular, do-it-all-yourself perfectionism, the very thing that made them strong for decades, became their fatal flaw. It made the kind of open, messy, global, risk-sharing partnership that saved ASML's skin completely impossible, both culturally and practically. So, in the end, here's the key takeaway. ASML didn't just win because they built a better machine. They won because they built a better business model, a model designed for an age of insane, skyrocketing complexity. They understood that the most complex machine in the world was too complex for any one company, or even any one country, to build by itself. And this corporate history lesson has led us to the world we live in right now. Today, ASML has a 100% total monopoly on the EUV machines needed to make the world's most advanced chips. This has turned a single company in the Netherlands into one of the most critical geopolitical choke points on the entire planet. The tech war between the US and China? In many ways, it's a fight over who gets access to these very machines. The story of Nikon and ASML is such a powerful reminder that in the world of technology, no empire, no matter how dominant, lasts forever. And it leaves us with this incredible lesson. In an age of impossible complexity, the future isn't always won by the strongest or the most perfect. It's won by those who are brave enough to share the risk and humble enough to ask for help.